Welcome, everyone. I just turned on the recording. Lisa, could you go back to the first slide? Thank you for joining us today. This webinar is on how to approach sustainability opportunities with non-governmental organizations. I would like to take a moment to thank the Office of Victims of Crime for sponsoring this. And I also want to remind you that any of the opinions or statements or recommendations that are made during this webinar are those of the author and don't necessarily represent the official position or the policy of the U.S. Department of Justice. I also want to mention that any of the pictures you see in this webinar are those of models and are used for illustrative purposes only. Next slide. Because we're a small crowd, please mute yourself when you're not talking, just so we can cut down on background noise, and use the chat feature. We might not be able to see you raise your hand because not all your pictures are on the screen. So if you have a question, you might want to just throw it in the chat and we will get to you. Also, if you could make sure that your Zoom square has your name that you'd like to be called during this event. Let me know if you're not sure how to change that. And if you have any technical issues, please reach out to me. And I'm Marty Washington, and my email is mwashington@ncall.us. Next slide. Today, we're joined by Holly Furr and Donna Ortega, and I'm going to just turn it over to them and let them introduce themselves.
Hello, everybody. I am Holly Furr. I am the director of the United Way of Lancaster County in Lancaster, South Carolina. Before that, I was working for our local sheriff's office with a federal grant. And before that, I spent about 10 and a half years. Spent about 10 and a half years in a local philanthropy. So I'm going to be approaching this from how to interact with local funders today.
And I'm Donna Ortega, and I used to work with Holly at that local funder. But right now I actually work for a think tank in Washington, D.C. But before that, I actually spent 8 years working with the AARP Foundation, which is a fairly large national philanthropy. And so I will be talking to you a little bit about what to do when you're trying to approach national funders. And I think we'll be a good tag team on this presentation. So very good to meet all of you. And I'm excited to share what we've got. All right, our learning objectives today, I'm not going to necessarily read them all, but certainly after attending the webinar, we want to make sure that you all understand some of the trends in the non-governmental funding space. Some general, fairly general parameters about how to seek funding, pre-planning in the application process, as well as how to shape narratives and programming, because part of, I think, applying for any kind of funding is always being able to tell your story in a compelling way. So we will touch on all of these things, but please feel free, as they'd mentioned earlier, to pop in if you have any questions, get us to pause. And hopefully this will be a good conversation with you all as well. Okay. Next slide, please.
So we want to do a quick poll. How would you describe your understanding of sustainability? And if Marty, you can launch that poll for us.
Lisa?
Yes.
I clicked on polls. I'm sorry, this is the first time I've had to do this. Oh, and I clicked on polls and the not launched, but there's no launch button.
Well, why don't I, want me to stop share and see if it'll give it back to you?
You
Let's
could
try
try that. It seems to me there should be a thing that says launch.
I put that, multiple people can do it. So see if you can do that.
In the meantime, while we're trying to get this worked out, I'm just gonna tell y'all what the poll is, and maybe you can put it in the chat. We can get some idea. So I feel comfortable sharing my knowledge with others. I'm not sure I understand exactly what it means. I think I know a little bit about it, and I'm definitely a newbie. So if y'all can just kind of rate where you are in the chat, that'll be great. Seeing a lot of new come in.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to launch this. It says not launched, but there's no launch button.
That's fine.
Anybody really good on Zoom can help me here?
I think we're getting some pretty good responses through the chat. It looks like it is a range. There's a few people who could certainly be talking about sustainability with all of you, but we also have a fairly good number of people who would consider themselves newbies, and that's not uncommon. I'll have to say that sustainability has become a big watchword, particularly for organizations that provide funding. I don't know if you all have noticed, but over the last couple of years, the world of funding has changed so much. Part of that, of course, was due to COVID, but all organizations, I think, are going to be starting to use the word sustainability because what they want to do is make sure that your organizations can continue to provide the services and programming that you've been able to do, but perhaps with some different funding availability. So we can go back to the presentation. Sorry we couldn't get that poll, but I appreciate the quick thinking to be able to say, let's just drop our responses into the chat. That was a great idea and it worked out really well. All right, so organizational sustainability. Sustainability, I think, is one of those terms that it's hard to define it without actually using the word sustain, but it's so that you are able to sustain the work that you do for as long as there is a need for it. And if you are an organizationally sustainable nonprofit, you're not only surviving, but you're also thriving as you continue to meet your mission. And there are several aspects of sustainability. There's sustainability of your programming to make sure that should you have any staff changes, for example, you're going to be able to continue to provide the services to the level of quality that you've been providing them. There's also, and I think this is the one that most people are thinking about when they talk about sustainability, and that's financial sustainability. And so we can go to the next slide. And for financial sustainability, it's really to make sure that you have enough revenue to meet the long-term operating needs of programs that are delivering on their mission. When we were setting up this conference or this program, one of the things that was raised was the idea that sometimes you can be seeking funding and it may not always be the best fit for what you want to do. And so here on the right-hand side, we actually have a quick 2x2 square that helps people think or helps organizations think about whether a potential funding opportunity might actually work well for them. You'll see along the oh boy, I can't remember which one is the x-axis, but one of the axes says mission match. And then the one that goes sideways is financial contribution. And I think it's fairly self-explanatory that as where you really want to be is in that upper right-hand corner. It's the clear winner corner. That's where you find a funding opportunity that meets your mission and is actually a net positive. I think that folks have probably heard the terminology sort of chasing the dollar or having mission creep. That's when you get into some of these other squares on this 2x2. If you're seeking funding that isn't the best fit for your mission, and it's actually not going to give you a net positive as far as raising the amount of revenue you have, then that could easily be a potential distraction. And if you are if you're chasing a dollar, there might be a pot of funding available, but it's something that isn't actually going to help you meet what you're setting out to do. So always being able to tie sustainability back to the idea that anything you do to sustain yourselves as an organization should really be about meeting your mission. And revenue funding is a great way to enhance your sustainability, but we should also consider that sustainability also can be created if you have operating reserves, which is funding, if you have a diverse set of funding opportunities, if you actually have the right systems in place, because at the end of the day, in order to be sustainable and to continue to offer programming and meet your mission, you really need to make sure that you understand how you're meeting your programming efficiently, that you're constantly improving those internal systems, that you have that stability within your staffing, and that you're able to adapt. I mean, right now, I think that change is a big watchword across a lot of funders, that organizations are going to have to adapt. The changes that are coming down the pike are coming faster and faster, and it's not just technology, it's actually a lot of things that are changing. So organizations that can adapt and continue to meet their mission while continuing to provide relevant and resilient services are going to be the ones that are more successful. If you have good community commitment and support, that also helps you to sustain your programming.
And I'm going to just jump on something that Donna said. Donna mentioned mission drift, but there's also mission creep. And that's when you're not necessarily as far off, but you start making small changes. And anybody who's maybe been on a hike or even driven in a town that you don't know, you make so many, just kind of veer off one way or the other, and you don't realize that you're so far off the trail or off the road that you were originally on. And so those small changes can impact. You don't necessarily have to think of it as a huge drift of your mission, but once you start making too many small changes, then you get so far away and you're already down the mission drift path before you even know it.
Any questions? All right. So this is, I think, the first of 2 slides to talk about how to interact with national partners. How many of you all are already receiving funding from large national foundations?
They all receive funding from the Office of Victims of Crime.
Okay. How about private funders, private foundations that are large national ones, Kresge, Ford, any of those big name foundations? I will tell you that it's, if you are seeking funding, I think it makes a lot of sense about how to potentially interact with national funders. First of all, do your research. Not all funders will put their information about what funding is available out through an RFP. But those are actually really great ways to understand what's important to a funder. I know the AARP Foundation puts out RFPs regularly. In fact, I think they just put one out a little while ago. So that is certainly something to be aware of. When you apply with national partners, unless you have that relationship, I think usually it's going to be responding to an RFP or an RFA or an LO or submitting a letter of intent that's really going to help you get in the door with those national funding partners. And when you do have the opportunity, or when you choose to apply, one of the things that you ought to make sure you're also aware of is that you are using the language that national funders are looking for. And again, I absolutely recommend taking a look at RFPs and RFAs, requests for proposals or requests for applications. Even if you're not sure it's going to be the best fit for you, I'd say take a look at them and read through them, because at the end of the day, they will tell you what sorts of information these national funders are expecting to see when you apply for funding from them. They're going to use a lot of words about data, evaluation, outcomes, and outputs. I think for a lot of organizations, they can emphasize outputs, which is, of course, it's the number of times that you are able to interact with someone, how many sessions you host, how many people you're ultimately serving. But when funders are talking about outcomes, they actually want to know how the world has changed based on the work that your organization does. So all of these, all of this language, it can be something that if you're familiar with it, that's great, but you can also spend some time learning what each of these terms means for those particular funders. Do folks generally have to create logic models or theories of change? Are these things that people are familiar with? Yeah, so they're not always the most fun, but I think that it is something that is generally expected when you're approaching national funders, is to have that one-page documentation that helps you make the case for what your organization is trying to accomplish. National funders as well, because they tend to have large, they may not have staff in the communities where you work, or they may be putting out a request for proposals that is a very large grant. Collaborating and finding other organizations to work with can actually help you make your funding more competitive. And that's actually something that they may actually require as part of the application. It may not be a single organization that they're interested in funding. They may want to fund a whole coalition of organizations in order to serve a particular community. So if you have good relationships with other partners in your space, sometimes if you can collaborate with one another and utilize the strengths of each of those organizations so that you're best able to put together a program that is going to be successful, that is going to cover everything from the research and the evaluation part of what the funders might be asking for. Certainly, it's the expectation that not every single organization will be able to do all of this themselves. And national funders also use terminology around absorption. If it is a very large pool of funding, sometimes they may not want to give funding to a single organization. They'd really like to provide funding to a coalition, which is great because that not only provides money for the different programs to do the work that they're good at, but some of that additional funding can actually support the really hard work of working together. As you all probably know, whenever you work with partners, there is work to just making sure that you are all on the same page, that you agree on things, that you understand who's doing what. So it's lovely when you can get that type of funding that will actually support that collaborative effort and not just the individual programming of each organization. Following directions. One other thing I will say, if you all have the opportunity, or if you've applied for funding, you've applied for federal funding, so you probably understand a lot about following directions. I will say that because a lot of national funders may receive many requests for funding, I think following directions is actually, it's really key, because at the end of the day, they want to be able to make that first pass and say, something is not going to be a good fit for them. And if you don't submit something, or if it turns out you don't have the right C3 status, or if you don't have, the right number of support Unfortunately, that can be the way they make that first cut, which is a shame, because then even if you have the best possible program, you may not have the chance to tell your story, which is a key part of the work that you're going to do. So it's actually really funny, because one of the resources we're going to talk to you about a little later is the Foundation Center or GuideStar. And there's a really short article on their website that talks about like grant makers' pet peeves. And one of their pet peeves, of course, is when organizations don't follow the directions. So I'm just going to tell you now, try to follow the directions, because anything you can do to make their lives easier just puts you in better standing. All right, next slide, please.
And as somebody who's done grant review for the federal level, if you know, don't make my job harder to try to give you money. So
exactly. Yeah. All right. The other thing that is, I'm going to say, special about working with national partners is that because they have I guess a different perspective, I think it's always really helpful when you're responding to an RFP or interacting with them, is that you always keep these 3 why questions in mind. The first one is why you? What makes your organization uniquely qualified and special, and is the best? What makes your organization a good investment? That's another terminology that national funders will use, is that it's a good investment of their funds. So why you? And that this should be really, I think, pretty basic, and or not basic, it's something that you all already know about your organizations, what makes you best able to do this kind of work. The flip side of that, when you're approaching a national funder, is that you also want to say, you want to be able to answer, why us? Why are you approaching this particular funder? How does what you do help them fulfill their goals? And it's not because national funders have that different perspective, they want to make sure that they're getting the best possible bang for their buck. It's the same thing with local organizations. The terminology of leverage, if there is something special about this particular opportunity, either that right now is the best possible time for you to be approaching them, that's always something that I think can help you stand out. Again, with national funders, they often, if it is an open request for proposals, they're going to see many applications. Some of them are going to be great, some of them are going to be awful, and some of them are going to be sort of on that cusp. So anything you can do to help your organization stand out as you're responding about what makes your organization particularly a good fit for something like this. And then also anything you can do to show that you understand what this funder is looking for. That's what the why us question is why this particular opportunity with this funder. Anything you can do to help tie what you do to what they want to accomplish. Sometimes it's having to be really explicit in your application to say that, you know, you understand that they're trying to focus in a particular community. So again, when you review the request for proposals or requests for applications, they usually provide pretty good clues about what they're looking for. And if anything you can do to help reiterate for them that this is what you offer is going to help them achieve that goal, I think that's going to be a great way to help ensure that your organization is competitive in that funding space. And again, that opportunity for leverage. So why you, why us, why now? There are 3 good questions to ask yourself. I'd say they're probably good questions anytime you're seeking funding, but especially when you're trying to approach a national funder. It's a way to make sure that your organization stands out across that really crowded field. Any questions?
So we have another poll. This one is the weather this summer has been, and your options are just perfect, too rainy, I don't want to even go outside, it's hot. And the last one, what weather, I work from home, I don't go anywhere. So I know we've got people from all over, just perfect. We've got some, we've got some working from home, too hot. I will say I am right now in the mountains of Georgia. And while outside it's perfect, inside it's cold. I have a little hoodie here that's draped over my lap because I'm cold. But we give this poll to say that there are as many different opinions of what our weather is right now as there are people. And just because you think it's perfect and somebody else might be in the same area thinks it's too hot, or if you're working from home, you don't even know what the weather is outside. We can all find common ground. We can all rely on each other. We don't have to necessarily be coming from the same perspective as we move forward together. Donna talked about collaboration. When you collaborate with somebody, you don't necessarily have to agree on everything. You just have to agree on the one thing that you're working together on and be able to move forward with that. So that's kind of how it is with the weather. And if you share your house with anybody else, the thermostat, but we're not going to get into that because that causes huge problems, I know, in many households, mine included. But because I pay the bills and my daughter doesn't, I get to set the thermostat. Okay, so next slide, please. We're going to switch to local partners, and we're going to start in the same spot that Donna did with our national partners, and that is doing your research. So, most local funders will issue either annual reports or press releases or put on their website about grants that they fund. Donna mentioned GuideStar. You can always go onto GuideStar or Candid, which we have in our resource list here, to see what kind of grants that they fund. So you want to look at what kind of programs they are funding, what their focus areas are, what kind of organizations they fund, how much they fund. If they don't specify in their grant making information of what their average grant is, go and do some research about that. So you're not issuing a grant proposal that is too high or too low for what they typically fund. In addition to that, how much does this organization, this funder, want to be involved? There are several local organizations, several local funders that really want to be active partners with you. That's a different spin on the national funders. You've got people that might not necessarily be in the area, as Donna said, whereas local funders are there, and a lot of local funders like to be involved with their grantees. So you need to know that. Stalk them on Facebook and their social media, Instagram, and see what kind of work they do with their partners. How often are they showing up at events, or are they just sharing posts about the work that their partners do? Actively engage with them if possible. If you see that they are attending a lot of events, or if they show up in the community, if they are members of your local chamber of commerce or civic groups or whatever, engage with them if possible. If that's the type of relationship that they want to have, make sure that you have the capability to evolve yourself in that as well. And you really need to make sure if it is a long or short-term relationship that you want to be in with this organization. So that goes back to your research. If you're looking at their funding multiple grants for the same organization, this might be a longer-term process. If they are, if they've just recently announced that they are going to work towards a certain goal in their community within the next 5 to 10 years, and you fit that organization's mission, then this might be a longer term process than a shorter, 1 to 2 year grant. If they do events, if they do workshops, if they do trainings, I encourage you to sign up for anything like that to hear from them directly. And then you're able to get that information and respond to their request easier, because you have heard firsthand from them what it is that they want to do and how they prefer to have their information, or you can see from the types of trainings that they offer, workshops, what things they are interested in, and how often does that fit into your mission and your programmatic desires as well. Next slide, please. Telling your story for partners is key for any grant, but I think for a small local funder, it's even more important, because they want to be able to share your story. When you're working with national partners, it's not as easy for them to share the individual stories as it is the local funders. These are people that are within your community or in your region, and they are interested in making that place better, and they want to make sure that they have that information from you. So, know your program, be able to frame it so a funder or a donor can easily identify and understand it. It's a really good idea if you can have someone who has no connection at all to your program to read through your application, because this might be the same situation that your local funder is in. They might not know your program yet, and they want to be able to understand it through your application. So if you have somebody who doesn't really know your program read it, you can know whether or not you're telling it in a way that someone who is not familiar with your program can understand it and easily identify what it is that you're trying to say. So I always encourage everybody to have some sort of proofreader that doesn't necessarily know your program. Have a success story. We tend to in the moment, are touched by some story of your program. And a lot of times, as nonprofit leaders, we don't necessarily think, oh, I've got to capture this. But, I encourage you to jot it down in your phone or on a slip of paper, get a quote if you can from an individual that has been impacted by your program, and store that away with their permission to be able to then share that. Your data needs to be up to date. There's nothing more frustrating than seeing data that is years old in a grant application. Not just with the census data that, is more up to date, and we tend to update that, but, maybe you've been using a news story or something from several years ago, and things have changed. So I would encourage you to make sure that you're keeping your data up to date. So your funders, particularly if you might have gone to them for a couple of times, they're not seeing the same information. So your community, your organization, just make sure that all of that data is up to date, and you are sharing that most recent with any funders. We talked a little bit about collaboration, but and Donna mentioned making sure that everybody knows what their role is, and that you are being clear in that, both with each other organizations, but also to the funders. You're saying, this is what this organization will do, even if it's a nonprofit or governmental entity or educational institution, that you're clear what everyone's roles are, and that you were sharing that in your application. A lot of times you can have attachments to those local funder applications, and that's where you could put an MOA or an MOU between organizations and spell that out in a document. I will also say, change up your letters of support. as someone who has reviewed grants, nothing would irritate me more than seeing 3 different letters by 3 different organizations that say literally the exact same thing. And I know, because when I ask people to submit a letter of support for me, they'll say, oh, Holly, just write it and send it to me and I'll sign it. And so the tendency is it's easy to just copy and paste and send it to 3 different organizations and have them have the same letter. But that doesn't tell me as a funder what that is doing. You know, be very specific, change it up. It's okay to have the same, you know, paragraph about something in there, but really make sure that you are clear on what everybody is going to be doing and how they support you, and that it's not, you're not just copying and pasting from one letter to the next. So I do encourage you, even if you write those for your people that are submitting letters of support, change those up so the funder knows that you have put the time and effort into this as well. So next slide, we're going to just share some resources that we have, and they're going to get a copy of this, right, Marty?
Yes.
Okay, so these are live links, and you can you'll have copies of these, but Candid and GuideStar, you know, is where most people go to look up 990s. So we encourage you to do that. But as Donna mentioned, they do have some really good information and articles on there as well. They also have a section of the Foundation Center on there. And so you can see listing of foundations, which is a good way to look through and potentially get some additional ideas for particular funders. Donna, you want to take the last 2?
Yeah, so the Council on Foundations is a national organization. If you all may have heard of community foundations, almost every community across the US actually has a funder that is particularly focused on that community. So if you're interested in finding one, this is the Community Foundation Locator. I believe you can search by city, by town. Sometimes there's actually, if you're lucky, there might be more than one foundation, one community foundation that is focused on your area. So I highly recommend that. The Council on Foundations is sort of a national membership organization for foundations. So I also find it really helpful to just sort of stop by their website and take a look at what's on their front page, because again, if you're interested in understanding what some of the trends are for where philanthropy is going, the Council on Foundations would be a good resource for that. Philanthropy News Digest, actually that is affiliated with GuideStar, which is now known as Candid, which used to be the Foundation Center. So all of these are pretty much the same resource. However, Philanthropy News Digest is great because you can actually sign up to receive a weekly, I think it's a weekly email, I'm pretty sure it's weekly, showing you which new requests for proposals are out, whether there's, again, not every funder, and particularly the national funders, will put out an RFP, but if they do put one out, more than likely you will get that from the Philanthropy News Digest email. How many of y'all are familiar with 990s? I will say that excellent. So 990s, I think, are for me, I'm also a tax nerd. I think 990s are like just a hidden trove of information. Not only can you find information about who's on the board of different foundations, which, you know, again, that's useful information, especially if you're trying to make connections. But you can also see who they've given funding to, how much their grants usually are, and what their interests are. So if you get a chance, and I know that GuideStar or the Foundation Center just got a new data dump of brand new 990s. So there's actually a lot more. It used to be stuff that was only current through 2019. I think they actually have some 2020, 2021 up on GuideStar as well, because again, because of COVID, a lot of things probably changed, but you can get some really good up-to-date information on GuideStar. I think you would have to set up a account, but it's free. And that way you'll be able to access as many 990s as you would care to look at.
And I will say, use that information in your relationship building as well. Share that with your committees or your board members. There might be people who serve on those local funding boards that might be willing to hear a little bit more about your program from a peer of theirs. So one of your board members or committee members might be able to touch base and say, hey, you know, I see that your own local community foundation board, and we're thinking about having a relationship with them, and you know, tell me about the organization, and you can get some more information from them firsthand as well.
Great.
Oh yeah, Nancy, that's a great idea. I just saw your chat.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm falling down on the job.
That's okay. She wrote, I even look at how much they pay their staff. So when I'm asking for salaries, I know what range they think is fair. Yeah, that is a good idea. And I would look at not just their staff, but the staff of other grantees that they're funding, because more than likely foundation staff are probably being paid more than nonprofit organizations are. But if you're looking at the types of organizations they fund, you can see what types of funding that they're making. Are they making organizational support, or are they making programmatic support? And you know, what do the organizations that they're funding, what do their budgets look like?
Yeah, I've done it because I always lowball it, and I learned that I'd be like, that they're paying, a person who answers the phone X, why would I be paying a social worker less? So it actually has encouraged me to up it a little bit. And then, because I do think as nonprofits, we tend to underestimate, and people who are in business, they think differently. So it's made me ask for more.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. So we're just going to open the floor for questions. If anybody has any, Donna and I are more than happy to try to answer those or tell you that we don't know, and we'll get back with you. I'm a big proponent of that. Don't ever answer a question you don't know. Please don't ever answer a question you don't know. There's nothing wrong with saying, I am not sure. Let me check on that and get back with you. So. Well,
I'd like to jump in here. I have reviewed so many grants, both from governmental grants and non-governmental and philanthropic grants. And so I really appreciate this presentation. It's going to make the quality of applications so much better from a reviewer standpoint. But I'm particularly glad that you focused a little bit on letters of support, because it's easy to think that people might concentrate on, I'm going to see how many of these I can attach, or if it's not a requirement, or if it is a requirement, I'm going to just make sure I meet this requirement. But I just want to say that reviewers read the letters. We don't just count how many you sent in. So just keep that in mind. So I loved your discussion on really being mindful of the content of those letters. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Marty. Yeah, it used to just get all up under my skin when I would see 5 letters that said the exact same thing. Just insert organization here, and we proudly support XYZ's application, and the rest of it says the same thing.
I've also seen the ones that left in insert your organization's name here.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the people filling it out didn't realize that they needed to personalize it. Oops. What other questions do you have for these two?
You mentioned earlier, how things are changing and dramatically, and I guess what prophecies do you have on how something's changing?
I wouldn't say that I have any prophecies, but I will say that that language around sustainability and the language around impact. If you all have not seen more funders looking, trying to utilize the impact or change, I think that is definitely something that you are going to be see more of. Foundations, I think, in particular, they have trends, I guess is the what I'm going to say. And again, if you are hanging out in areas where the foundations are, there is a lot of information out there about what foundations are focused on. That can help you sort of get ahead of the curves to make sure that you're using the language that resonates with them, that you are talking about your work in a way that they're going to be able to immediately take what you say and say, yes, this is going to help me make the case or fulfill this other goal. I think that the great thing about foundation funding is that there seems to be a lot of it floating around. But I think if you're talking about sustainability, I absolutely would not discount thinking about individual funders as well and working with individual donors in your community, because particularly for the type of work that you're doing, I think there's a very good personal story, something that people can really relate to. So finding those individual donors or seeking that sort of varied types of funding can be really great. Foundation funding is good, but it also comes with hoops. I guess I'm gonna use that word, hoops, to jump through. You're gonna have to report on a regular basis. You're going to have to, abide by the different types of things that they're asking for, which is great if you have the ability to do so. But if you're looking for flexible funding that's just going to help you do your mission, carry out your work, I absolutely would not discount individual donors and seeking funding from a variety of sources, because all of those different types of funding that you can weave together, it's what's going to make your organization sustainable.
And I will caution you, the power of saying no, because there might be times, particularly with local funders, but it can happen in national as well. Sometimes if they are going in a new direction, they kind of want you to change things up to match what they're doing. And if it's not what you do, even if you've gotten money from them the last 3 years, really think about the power of no and what that would be, and be able to say, no, I don't think that adding that piece would make our program stronger. And they might surprise you. They might say, well, we appreciate that, and we're just going to continue at what we have been. But you also do need to be prepared for if they say, okay, well, then you can't compete in this year's funding, then you need to figure out what their in lies for you next. I think Linda's got her hand raised.
Thanks. So going back to impact, I'm curious what trends you're seeing. I've been writing grants for decades at this point, and I ask about impact. I always want to say, oh, we can reach this high number and give this quantity, and I know I'm overshooting. Is it better to be really, really painfully realistic, say I might only be able to serve 20 people, but here's what impact it can have on their lives? I'm just curious what you would advise on that.
I think that magic dance is something that we're all struggling with, is how do you tell that story? I think you can take clues by looking at what the foundation says about their work. If they're a foundation that is really into talk, and I'm going to make a pretty broad generalization here, but I'd say corporate funders love to be able to say numbers. They want to be able to say, our corporate funding, because they're interested in reaching a broad market. And so they want to be able to say, yeah, we've reached XYZ number of people. Whereas some more thoughtful funders, which again, you sort of have to know your funder, you have to have that relationship with them. They would actually be better moved by hearing about how your organization is truly having that long-term change in individuals' lives. I wish we could tell you which one was the best one to use, but absolutely take those context clues from reading about how the foundation talks about itself, and try to say it the way that they talk about themselves, because that's particularly for national funders, they have entire teams of communications people that spend a lot of time crafting that message of what the foundation cares about and what's important to them. And you may as well benefit from being able to access all that information right from their websites, their annual reports, and then just try to make your messaging echo theirs. Sounds bad, but foundations, I mean, they're about themselves sometimes. So in that case, you want to fit that mold with them, and you want to show that you are paying attention to what they're saying and that you are able to really help them have the type of impact that they're sharing or that they're talking about that they have out in the community.
Yeah. You think of it like we're going to date, and then we're going to be engaged, and then we're going to be married. That pre getting to know you phase of dating, when you're researching a foundation, maybe showing up at some events, taking their workshops, walking kind of with them, and then you get engaged, and maybe you're a little bit further along in the process, and then when you submit the grant and you're accepted, you're married to them now, and where you go I go kind of thing. And so you've got those process that you're going to go through, and the information is out there. It's just, we know it's time consuming and a pain to find it, but it really does help pay off in the long run if you're willing to pour over some 990s and some annual reports and some impact statements. It's really going to pay off in the long run.
Other questions? We've got about 5 more minutes.
How do you feel about calling a foundation who's rejected you and just saying, hey, can you give me, like in a sincere way, like, can you just give me feedback, or, or what did you like? What didn't you like? Or, should we try again?
So I can answer that as a former grants officer. When I was a grants officer with a local foundation, I hated that phone call. Because I mean, as a local funder, you're going to run into these people at the grocery store and wherever, and you still have to make sure that a relationship can be there. But as someone who submits grants, I've done it as well. I mean, help me know what can make this better. And I usually come from a place of humility to say, I know this is a hard question to answer, but if you could just give me any feedback that, I would appreciate it. And I recently had a funder say, budget constraints right now are really bad, and we had to put several applications on hold, and we hope to be able to have funding by the end of the year, and yours is one of them. And I appreciated that, and I can understand that. So that tells me there's, maybe nothing wrong with my application, so to speak, but they just don't have the funds, or, had more requests than they expected. So yeah, I encourage that, but you might or might not get it, and you might or might not get the types of feedback that you're really seeking that would make a future application better. Just be prepared for that as well. Donna, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I would just say that it doesn't hurt to ask. And I've worked at particularly local funders where they actually have something called the why no call. So this is to explain why no. Not every organization or every funder is going to do that, but particularly for funders where they're interested in that relationship, in that opportunity to, again, really have impact and help their organizations that are working with them improve. Because again, that's why philanthropies, whoops, sorry, my intern is fussing with me here. That organizations that are really interested in making communities better, that's part of their investment, is that capacity building or that technical assistance. And so being able to answer that question, or having an answer for that question that is aimed at helping organizations step up and improve. It doesn't hurt to ask, but I absolutely agree with Holly that come from a place of humility. You don't want to be argumentative and say, why didn't you fund me? It's really more about, okay, I know we didn't get the funding, but what can we do so that our next application is more competitive, or, approach it from that idea of improving so that you are able to help them, again, with the foundations, you want to make it about them, help them reach whatever goal or impact they want to have they want to see in their community.
Thank you, Donna and Holly, so much for sharing all of your expertise with us today. We just have a minute left. I want to just mention that Lisa has dropped the evaluation link into the chat, and I'll also be emailing it out. But please click on that link and give us some feedback about this presentation. With that, I don't know if we have much time for any other questions. Does somebody have a real quick question?
And our contact information is on the slide. So when y'all get that, if you need to reach out to Donna or I individually, we'll be more than happy.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for inviting us. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for what y'all